We'll talk about ISO 45001, AS 4801, OH&S 18001. There's a bunch of stuff to talk about, but I'm bringing in some sort of current context, if you like. So every single one of our webinars is different. I don't go over the same content. Some of the content's similar, but we'll have a few different things for you today. And definitely, there's been a bunch of questions come through which have affected or influenced what I've got to talk about today. Shout out to the guys in Canada. Thanks for joining us. Shout out to the guys in the US, in the eastern and western states, and the north and the south of the US. A couple of people registered from the UK. Absolutely excellent. And there's a bunch of people here in Australia watching in the business hours. So thanks for getting up early or staying up late, depending on where you are in the world. It's great to have you online. And so, yeah, for those of you watching, I'm doing my best to try and bring a global view of OH&S to you. Certainly for the Australians in the audience, we're here in Australia. There's been some changes, and you know, we are talking about WHS, workplace health and safety, but globally, it's occupational health and safety. It's OH&S, and so I'm going to use that language today. I'm going to use the global language, not what we use here in Australia. So. Yeah, I'm not sure if Australia's made the right decision about going down the WHS path. I definitely think that the OH&S is the way to go. That's just my opinion, but I'll get off my soapbox. Okay, Jack, give me another slide. Okay, so just a quick little bit about best practice and what we do here. Best practice is obviously all about certification from one side of things, but the other is about professional development and improvement to support people that are working with management systems. And so what we've got here is our ISO 45001 logo, and that'll be to my right hand side, I think. I'll get that sorted in a second. But looking as I can understand what's right and what's left. So this is the certification. So it's successfully implementing a management system in accordance with ISO 45001 would enable you to display our logo. So we would put you under test, we'd do a best practice assessment, we'd look at your management system, we'd look at how you execute and implement that management system, and we look at what records and evidence you keep, and then a successful review or a successful best practice assessment against that standard would allow you to display that particular logo and reference your organisation. So show your customers, show your suppliers, show your staff that you have some external recognition. And we've got a team of assessors that can help you with that. Now that's obviously one part of best practice. There's another great part of best practice, which is the big shout out today, which is to our training academy. And it's our training academy and the revenue from our training academy that we put straight back into producing events like this for you guys. And I apologise for the delay and the technical hitch. It seems that every single startup we have a technical hitch, and we do our best to get organised, but when we go live with YouTube, there's no going back. So I apologise for that short delay. But the Best Practice Training Academy has a whole bunch of online training courses that have been recorded and produced, and they're all about the ISO standards, the safety, quality, environment, all those sorts of things. And they sit on the bestpracticecertification.com.au website. So if you were to go to that website and look at the top banner, you'll see a blue button that says Shop Training, and I'd encourage you to go and have a look in that store. Just clicking the button doesn't oblige you to buy anything, but there's a whole bunch of free stuff in there that you can download, and there's some really, really reasonably priced training courses that you can do, and I'd encourage you to go and learn a little bit more. You want to learn a little bit more about internal auditing. You want to learn a little bit more about ISO 45001. You want to learn about ISO 9001 or 14001. Get a bit of a well-rounded view of your colleagues' requirements and work that they do in the organisation. There's some great little courses. They're really easy to purchase. It's just a case of there's an intro video with each course that explains what the course is about. There's a purchasing process. Then that course is yours. It creates a little pigeonhole, if you like, or a little place for you in our training academy, and it allocates all your courses, and you can go back there any time. It gives you a username and a password. It's all automatic. You get a username and a password and your course, and it's not like going to a classroom where you do the course and then it's gone. Here in the Best Practice Training Academy, you get the opportunity to come back and see that content. So in the same way as we're recording this webinar, and you can come back and see this webinar anytime, you got the opportunity to obviously to collect this recording and save it somewhere, and the same applies to our training courses. So please look over there and have a look. It helps out the Training Academy here at Best Practice. and then we turn that revenue back into more of this content, which is absolutely fantastic. So we'd appreciate your support there. So the other aspect, and some of you may know, and some of you may not, is that we're very, very active on YouTube. And in fact, this webinar is being broadcast using an engine that sits behind YouTube. And of course, if you'd like to know more about how that all works, I'm always happy to show people. But more importantly, just have an understanding that if you're watching through our training academy, there is a small button down the bottom that you can press view on YouTube, and you can that's the place if you want to place comments against the video, and you can click that button. So if you haven't done that already, go for it. If your feed drops out in this presentation, don't panic. We're going to send out the recording. And equally, if you just have a look at those social media handles, and this has probably been one of my biggest challenges in the last few weeks, is to try and get the message out there that we're very active on these platforms. I think one thing that's really important is that the Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram and Snapchat logos here at Best Practice aren't just because we put them on our website. There's something happening on all of those platforms on a, if it's not every day, it's every second or third day. We are starting to experiment with Snapchat. So if you're a Snapchat user, start engaging with us. It's a good opportunity to sort of get one-on-one with us as we start to play with how we can actually use that platform to help you and interact with you. You get to see what's happening on a day-to-day basis. So Beck is starting to play with that. And then obviously my LinkedIn handle. So anybody in the presentation, if you're watching this, if you're not connected with me on LinkedIn, please find me, and I'd encourage you to use that great platform. Just find me on LinkedIn, search, and then hit connection request. I'll accept that connection, and then that's a great way to send me messages backwards and forwards. I get hundreds and hundreds of thousands of emails, hundreds every day running this business and the other parts of what I have to do for my responsibilities. But LinkedIn and the messaging system in LinkedIn is a really great way for me to answer your questions directly and for you to get to me directly, because I check that every afternoon when I get home from work. So I sort of take a break, go spend some time with the family and play with the kids and those sorts of things, and then once they've all gone to bed, I get the opportunity to go back and look through those LinkedIn messages every evening. Or if I'm on getting on an airplane waiting at airports, that's the place to interact with me on LinkedIn. Okay, so that's enough about best practice. I've got some great content for you, so Jack, let's get into it. Okay, so let's talk about occupational health and safety management systems. So we're running a company here at Best Practice. I've been out to see a few companies this week. It's the middle of the week here in Sydney, Australia. It's Wednesday. And I've been out to see a couple of clients this week, and I've looked at their organisations with some of my team. And to a certain extent, with some of those visits, we looked at OH&S, Occupational Health and Safety, and we were talking to them about their management systems, but we're also talking to them about some of the risks and hazards that they have in their organisations. So what I'm concerned with here for the rest of the presentation is how are hazards and risks managed, and how can we do that strategically? So let's come to this webinar and your thought process of how do you strategically manage safety in your organisation? How are you thinking about the business plan, if you like? And we'll talk more about those top tips as we get into this presentation. But how are we looking at the priorities around OH&S? What are the injuries and incidents that are likely to happen in the organisation, the injuries and incidents that are happening, the unsafe aspects of the industries that you work in. So my questions to you are, what are the unsafe aspects of the industry that you work in? What are the injuries and incidents that are likely? Now, I do appreciate that some of you work in office-based corporate environments, and I've had a look at the list of registrations, and I appreciate that. So when we're looking at that, in some of the corporate structures that we have, psychology is an important aspect, and the psychological impact of the workplace, the long work hours of some of the corporate people. So while it might not be unsafe, like it's not a building site or a mine site or a factory, but from a corporate perspective, we're seeing corporate OH&S issues like psychology, burnout, bullying, those sorts of things, a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration built around organisations and how organisations may be not as well managed as they could be. So when we're thinking about hazards, it's not just necessarily about the physical, chemical, biological hazards that exist, but obviously the psychological hazards. So we start to think about that. So ultimately what an occupational health and safety management system is all about is producing this, or creating a safer environment, ultimately reducing injuries and incidents, and then obviously that's got a connection to cost, so we're minimising the costs of injuries and incidents, and the relationship of that cost structure with trying to reduce those injuries and incidents, and then obviously increase production. So it's not just the cost of the claim, it's the cost on the business, and then obviously helping organisations continuously improve their safety performance. So I'll just talk about an organisation that I did spend some time with a little while ago, which was a security organisation, and that they provide security and security guards. And in their organisation, they've had 2 murders. So 2 of their security guards have been murdered. So they've been at work doing their job, either for that organisation or another organisation, and then they've been murdered on the job. And what's that all about? Well, they've obviously upset a member of the community where they were working, and it wasn't here in Australia. It was in another country. So they've upset a member of the community. Now that member of the community has come back out of the community a couple of days later with a bugbear or a concern, and there's been an altercation, and that guy, the 2 people have lost their life. So that's quite extreme, and we're not always talking about that, but that's an unsafe aspect of that industry. So what we're starting to think about is, okay, well, how can we start to put preventative strategies in place? So more training for those guards on managing psychology and managing the situation when there's an altercation or an incident, so that there's not sort of this want of retribution on the guard. They're just there to obviously do their job and keep the organisation safe, but equally that it doesn't happen again as often. So that's what the management system's all about. Now, what we've got here on the screen, and I think I need to move out of the way, correct me if I'm going the right direction, is that we've got the 3 logos of the 3 different management system standards that we use here at Best Practice, which is AS 4801, Occupational Health and Safety Assessment System 18001, or OH&S 18001, and then ISO 45001. So that's it's something to have a think about. But ultimately, what I'll say at this point in time, that all of those standards are very, very similar. And one of the questions we'll talk about in the Q&A that's come in is, what's the difference? And I'll talk about some of those subtle differences. Am I far enough out of the way? I haven't moved across yet. So a little bit of a lag with our display at the moment. So when we are looking at those management system standards, those international documents provide the guidance for how to set up a safety management system. They talk about the policies that we need to write. They talk about the process that we put in place for hazard identification, risk assessment, and control. They talk about defining processes for what do we do in the case of an emergency. And it's not just about providing first aid and repairing the person's injury, it's about doing an investigation and looking at the opportunities for correcting the organisation. Looking at how we can correct processes, looking at how we can go through and improve the organisation and ultimately improve the performance. One thing you'll notice about our logos here for these particular standards is, yes, they're a tick, if you like, in terms of getting approval, but they're a performance over time graph. So ultimately what we're focused on here at Best Practice is helping you with things like this webinar or an on-site assessment or a training course to improve your performance. And so when you look at that Best Practice logo, that's what that's all about. It's obviously about looking at performance improvement opportunities, but more importantly, before any of that, is getting a clear understanding, I think, first and foremost, of your areas of deficiency in terms of your performance, and that's where our graph sort of, it dips down and then it goes on to improve. Okay, Jack, thank you. So let's just quickly have a talk about what makes a successful occupational health and safety management system. And I think really there's 2 parts to this. I observe a lot of effort goes into putting black words on white paper. You open your Microsoft Word document and you start typing a policy and creating a form, maybe writing a procedure, and I see a lot of work. And I probably see, across the thousands of organisations we've worked with, I see a lot too much effort, in fact, put into, sitting at a computer screen and typing up a document and saving it to a folder, and this is how we're going to run things. Recently, really interesting discussion last week with a client about our system's not very good, but we're contracting to another company. It's a building contractor. They're contracting to another company, and we're going to use the other company's management system. Or there's one new system. My brother-in-law actually on the weekend went away with my sister and my brother-in-law on the weekend to a family holiday, and my brother-in-law is talking about his organisation, and he's saying, well, we've got two systems and we're not quite sure which one to use, and they're being implemented out on site. What should we do? And so, occupational health and safety management systems, it's not about the documents and the policies and procedures, and I would almost encourage you to not have that stuff. Put more effort into building behaviours and cultures and the processes. So what happens when someone hurts themselves? Well, everyone rushes in to help. So that's a management system. Like it's humans responding to a situation, and a management system is all about, okay, well, the situations that don't come up so often, how should we respond? And that's ultimately what it's about. So a successful system then is management commitment, and it starts with management commitment. And management commitment could be that someone's hurt themselves and everyone rushes in to help, and that's excellent. That's sort of that human nature. So we build on that and we say, okay, well, something's wrong. If something's wrong with the company and we see a deficient area of performance, everyone rushes in to help. Management dives in to help and improve the organisation and improve the situation. So that's really if I can give you that realistic commitment of what management commitment looks like. It's not like, management read the document and, marked it up and put red comments on it and all those sorts of things. That's not management commitment. Management commitment's about, the positive response you get from your top management and your senior managers and your supervisors and the organisation about getting in and helping to fix a problem. Another part of obviously successful system is employee involvement. What does that look like? So you've got a whole bunch of truck drivers. You've got a big fleet of trucks, and there's a whole bunch of truck drivers or lorry drivers for you guys in the UK, a whole bunch of lorry drivers, and they know how to safely operate a vehicle. So having them involved to start to talk about, how fast to take a corner and what type of weather conditions to drive in and those sorts of things, they're going to be, sort of more on the money or more on the point around what are realistic controls to implement, what's going to be a safe way to operate, what they're happy with, what they can implement with the skills that they've got. Now, as a manager, it is important to cut through the negativity that might come about change and understand what, from a change perspective, what they're upset about, but then from an improvement perspective, what they care about. So that's really a leadership and management sort of skill that needs to be acquired to sort of cut through that. But definitely what I can say is that having employees involved and consulting with them on what do you guys think is the safest way to operate? What are the issues that we've got in terms of, what we need to improve? Got a question from Ryan? Someone's hit the live chat. So just add that to the Q&A and we'll bring it into the presentation. So what we've got there is from the third part I'm up to is hazard identification and control, is that a successful system has a process to identify hazards, and then once we look at those hazards we say, well, how are we going to control them? And I've got a really good case study in a couple of slides time around that. Obviously compliance and identifying compliance requirements and understanding what it is that we need to comply with. So your legal requirements, so where you operate, what jurisdictions are you in from a compliance perspective, and then obviously the element there of training. So good successful systems got training. So we make some changes in the organisation, we update the policy. How do we actually communicate with people? And how do you guys communicate with people? And thinking that through, and I'll just talk about us. We're running best practice, we're human, we stuff things up all the time, and we try and minimise the collateral damage of those mistakes and then move on really quickly. So in an executive strategy meeting this week on Monday, our systems manager, our compliance manager is quite frustrated with me because there's no commitment and we're a sales focused organisation. I'm like, we are committed, but tell me what that looks like. And so when we talk about training, it's about saying, okay, well, what training do people in the organisation coming back? What people in the organisation, what's their level of skill, and are they competent and feeling confident? And I guess it's a question of confidence. Do people feel confident to do what you're asking? And so how do we help them to feel confident? Not just we give them training and we just expect them to implement the task. So can you have a look at for me when you're thinking about training is what skills and experience do we need to provide, and how will we do that to have our people feel confident to implement our systems, and confident to implement the controls, and confident to use the safety equipment. Not competency, confidence. And that's something we look at here at the Best Practice Training Academy. Is our courses in the Training Academy and these webinars, they're all about giving you confidence. We don't give you, yes, there's little certificates, but then some of our courses are not recognised because our courses are just about giving you some confidence and some knowledge to go and do something further. So that's something I'd ask you to consider. Is it's not always about looking outside the organisation for a training provider and spending lots of money. It's about understanding and liaising with your team, the employee involvement around, well, what would help you guys to feel more confident to do this task that we're asking. And obviously the last part is continuous improvement. So we stuffed something up and we fixed it, and we stuffed something up and we fixed it. How can we look at opportunities to learn from that experience and then look at improvement? And we're making improvements every day here at Best Practice as we grow this organisation, and we're growing very, very quickly. And not only are we trying to fix things that we break, but we're finding that every day we get a little bit bigger as an organisation, and that changes the way we need to operate on a constant basis. So, probably the most important part of a successful occupational health and safety management system is how do you manage improvement? How we manage it here at Best Practice is that every Monday we have a set agenda, and our executive gets together and we list all the issues that we've got, and we have a process where we say, right, what's the issue? And then we discuss it, and then we solve it, and we allocate responsibilities. We write it down on our to-do list. So all the executive managers here at Best Practice, including myself, have a to-do list, and we work through and execute the items on that to-do list. And that sees us, very efficiently continually improve our whole management system. So not just the safety part here at Best Practice, but the whole management system. It doesn't mean that we don't stuff things up. We do make mistakes, but what we do is we continually improve over time. Okay, Jack, thank you. Okay, so when we start to get down to the nitty-gritty of obviously occupational health and safety management systems, there's this core hazard identification, risk assessment and control. And that's something that I want you to have a think about, is what's your sort of tool for priority, and what's the way that you go about using and understanding how you can prioritize the issues that you've identified. And so this little case study I've got here is obviously a brick, and the possibility to drop, there's a hazard that I could be carrying bricks, and I could drop those bricks on my foot or on my toes. And we've shown a pair of safety boots here, and so what we start to think about is, okay, well, if I'm carrying a brick with my hand, what's the likelihood of, or what's the potential for me to drop that brick on my foot? And we can look at our little risk tool here, and we can say that it's possible. It's possible that after you've carried 50 or 100 bricks, that we've got this situation where we could then have this, dropping of the brick. Okay, so we look at that likelihood. So yes, it's possible. Is it likely? It's not really likely. I've got pretty strong hands, so it's possible. It's not unlikely. I think probably for every 50 bricks I pick up, I probably drop one, maybe two. And then what are the consequences? Now, if I'm on the building site with the bricks with bare feet, no shoes on, then of course the consequence could be moderate or significant. And so if we said possible and then moderate or significant, we get a response which is medium or medium to high. Now, if it was very likely that we drop the brick because we haven't got very strong hands or not a good system for carrying bricks, or we're carrying too many, likely or very likely, then it could potentially be high. Like if I drop the brick on my foot, I will break a bone. So that's an injury. And so we won't talk too much about the types of injuries and the severity of injuries. We're just talking about, very basic risk assessment here of a situation. So we've now got a score. So we've got a score of, say, medium or medium to high. Now, that in isolation is not important. But once we start to look at an organisation that's got hundreds of people, or tens or hundreds or thousands of people doing tens or hundreds or thousands of different tasks, we start to become, as a manager, overwhelmed with, well, what should we focus on first? And so risk has, on a risk assessment like this, has two key drivers. One is the driver to focus on solving the individual problem by itself, and then one is the driver to prioritize which problems we focus on first. So let's just talk about solving this problem first. This particular problem can be solved with, I believe, focusing on reducing the consequences first. So let's look at our little table and say, if we were to put the steel cap or safety shoes on and we drop the brick on our foot, would it still hurt? Yes, of course it would, because I've done it. I can tell you from experience it still hurts, but not as much. And so we've reduced the impact, if you're using our table here, to maybe minor. Might bruise or just hurt for a little while, but it's not going to be a permanent injury where we've got a broken bone or scars or a cut or a laceration on our foot. And so the first part of the risk assessment, which is about managing the hazard or the risk itself, is to focus on trying to reduce the consequences, because if we can reduce the consequence, it doesn't really matter how many times it happens. And then we want to focus on potentially reducing the likelihood. Now, if we go back to the client I talked about earlier with murders, obviously it's not about reducing the likelihood of there being a murder, it's about reducing, and that's that a member of the community comes back and kills one of our guards. It's about, okay, how can we reduce the consequence? So if we can avoid having any murders and people losing their lives or fatalities, then that's going to be better, I think, than reducing the likelihood, if that makes sense. Now, that's my opinion, and I'm happy to have an argument with you later on over social media about that.